Hello, and welcome to Introduction to Disaster Mapping. My name is Russell Deffner. I am the response coordinator for the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team. And without further ado, let's begin the presentation. And if you're not real familiar with HOT, then this slide's for you, basically. As you can read there, it says a little bit about who we are and what we do. In a nutshell, we're an international organization dedicated to humanitarian action and community development. We do mapping and training for mapping, some tech innovation. The team I'm on is the community team, so we're big into empowering individuals as well as communities to contribute to OpenStreetMap and the whole humanitarian and disaster mapping aspect, as well as building partnerships with other nonprofit organizations and donors, private sector, academia, etc. Today we're focusing on the disaster mapping component of what HOT does. Oftentimes we'll call it activation. You'll sometimes hear it called crisis mapping or emergency response, etc. But in general, what we're talking about is like a specific event or like an anticipated humanitarian impact that's kind of characterized by a relatively short-term duration, as well as being a part of what I'll get into is the disaster cycle. So typically we're talking about the response and recovery phases of the disaster cycle, and that's kind of in juxtaposition to like a longer term humanitarian project for economic development or something like that. Our disaster mapping program, as you can see on this slide, it's 3 components, basically. I mean, it's very simplified to 3 components. One is the activation protocol, which we'll talk about a bit in detail. And then the pieces that I'd really like folks to think about and give feedback on is the curriculum and the training center. So you can see, oh, sorry, I'll get there we go, if I put my cursor over here, and hopefully the slide number goes away so you can see it. So yeah, activation, as I just kind of defined, this term that is typically used internally, and then disaster mapping, as the title of the webinar, is kind of what we use for external communication. The protocol, as I was saying, it's kind of like the standard operating procedure, if you can think of it like that. It outlines the steps that need to be followed in order to be successful in an activation. The activator curriculum, so we typically refer to the folks that are trained to do this as activators. So the curriculum being like the checklist of like what information do we need to these people to know in order to be successful in going through the activation protocol. And then finally, the Activation Training Center, or the HOT Training Center, which currently is a self-paced online coursework for folks to go through on their own. It's built on Moodle. If you want to get into the details of the platform it's built on, yeah, some of you have probably seen Moodle. It's an open source sort of e-learning platform. One thing I've been trying to come up with like a bit of a metaphor for how this works, and what I've kind of come up with is that the activation protocol is basically like a blueprint. It's a blueprint of a house or a structure. The curriculum is kind of like what people need to know, right? The electricians need to know something different than the plumbers, et cetera, in order to put the house together. So that's this 3-part kind of system, if you want to think of a metaphor to go along with it. So before we dig in too far, I'm going to go ahead and launch a couple polls here. This first one just being really kind of an icebreaker. If I can find hold a second. From the beginning of OpenStreetMap, there was like these disaster events happening, and people were going into OpenStreetMap to map the area of impact, and what I would call like the ad hoc phase of disaster response. Going back to like 2005, when OpenStreetMap was like barely a year old, there was already people, sort of exploring this territory. So what would basically happen is, if this was successful and people got, a crowd rallied around a particular event, two things would typically happen. One, lots of people would join in and start mapping the area together. And two, because the more people, oh, sorry, does somebody have a question? Yeah, somebody's unmuted, but yeah, please go ahead and jot your questions in the chat, and I'll get to them once we get to the sort of the break at the half-hour mark, roughly. So when you get a lot of people mapping together, potentially a lot of edit conflicts. Hopefully none of you have run into the whole conflict resolution process in OpenStreetMap, especially in JOSM. It's very difficult to do, but yeah, just maybe a poor example, but an easy one to visualize is if somebody starts editing a road from one end and somebody from the other, eventually you'll probably have a conflict because you're trying, you're editing the same feature. Somebody's going to save before the other one, and then your saves are kind of running into each other in the database. The other thing that happens, and it still happens, we haven't quite figured this one out of how to completely get rid of it, but people will end up mapping the same feature, right? We see a lot of duplicate buildings. Well, it used to be even worse. So like we just be glad that we've done things to try to improve that. What ended up happening is in roughly 2009-ish, an early version of what is now called the Tasking Manager. I forget what it was actually called before. I don't think it was called the Tasking Manager, but basically a piece of software was developed where it would just cut the area of interest into squares, and you can check out your square and check it back in when you're done, and that keeps people from sort of stepping on each other's toes and causing as much conflict as there used to be. As probably many of you know, in early 2010, there was a major earthquake in Haiti, and the group of people that were calling themselves the OpenStreetMap team came together and like really proved this whole concept of disaster mapping in OpenStreetMap for a major event. And later in 2010, HOT would actually be formalized and an organization, a nonprofit in the US, basically with the mission to coordinate those efforts. So fast forward, basically 4 years to 2014. As those years went on, we as HOT led 28 major incident responses, still kind of in that ad hoc, just grab people, call people in to map. And there wasn't a lot of structure to the process to get there. It would just be like whoever could create the project, and then people would start tweeting and talking about it on the mailing lists, et cetera, et cetera. This included one response that I'll pause on here, is that the activation for the Ebola outbreak in West Africa 2014. This one would actually take our focus for a little over a year. It's probably, I don't know if you can see it really well if you're on a phone or something, you probably can't really read the stats there, but over 2,000 people contributed to this event. Over 11 million changes to OpenStreetMap were made. I don't have the stats for like how many buildings and such, but it was a very impressive response, so much so that it caught the attention of the Hewlett Foundation. And they actually awarded us quite a large, a significant amount of funds for HOT back in 2014. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see it's actually the text from the blog post. You don't need to worry about reading that right now, but if you want to come back later, it's there. The key things to take away from there is we actually put the funds in thirds, not quite thirds, but we split it amongst 3 different projects. One was field papers. So if you don't know field papers, it's basically you print out a map, you take it with you into the field, and you make annotations, and you can scan it back in, and then use that to add information to OpenStreetMap. It's kind of one of the lowest tech ways of contributing to OpenStreetMap. The next thing was also a development project, which was to basically launch our export tool. So this is a tool, maybe some of you used it. I'm not going to get into the details on it. I think it's just exports.howtosim.org. You can find it through our website or search for it, but it's just a way to get extracts of the OpenStreetMap data, so you can make your own custom extract, pulling out different data sets, and use that for humanitarian purposes. And then the third thing that we're really here to talk about today is we decided to, as we said at the time, to build the number of activation coordinators up. So as I was saying before, we've kind of evolved to call them activators. But really the purpose was to, to take the small number of people we had that were serving this ad hoc coordination and grow that number. But what we immediately kind of realized when we started working on this was that there's actually 3 components to this activation piece, as I was showing at the beginning, right? We have the standard operating procedure, or the activation protocol, which will be the focus of a lot of the material today, the curriculum, and the training program. And that we needed all 3 of those to really start building up the numbers of activators. So what does the activation protocol actually do for us? Well, number one, it defines activation or disaster response and alternative responses that we might do if activation is not the right thing. Number 2, it provides the groundwork for the functions activators perform during an activation. The third thing is that it breaks response activities into the 4 phases, which we'll get into with the disaster cycle. And lastly, it sets sort of a minimum expectation to successfully get through an activation and ultimately, or I should say, get through those phases and ultimately have a successful activation. So, as I was saying, you'll often hear disaster workers saying, we're always somewhere in this disaster cycle, which is really like the middle grayscale portion of the image, the response, recovery, and preparedness. And what we did is kind of build the activation protocol around that. So the 4 phases of, and I'll get into it more. So I'm just going to, for now, for simplicity, phase 1, 2, 3, and what we call phase 0, or our sort of day-to-day readiness stuff, kind of fits into that circle or around that circle as the. So if we look at the cycle kind of expanded out or laid out, we'll start to see more about like how the protocol instructs activators to complete each phase and ultimately resulting in success. So kind of at the end of phase 1, you end up with a decision of what to do, whether that's a full-blown activation or making it a locally led event. We'll get into it a little more. The phase 2 kind of being whatever the objectives that you set out in phase 1. So if we decide there's been a request from an NGO that they need the road network completed in an area, then the success of phase 2 would be to finish that road network and whatever other objectives. Phase 3 being kind of the conclusion of an activation, and really the sort of success at the end of this is that we've captured any lessons learned from this activation, so that we can take it into our day-to-day, our phase 0, and a successful sort of continual phase 0 is that we're able to do the new buzzword of like the anticipatory actions, right? Of being able to say, because of our last response, we realize now that we need to, add in more training or whatever it happens to be to build capacity locally, or maybe it's even as simple as like getting the road network done before the disaster strikes, so that it's already there for first responders to use immediately. So yeah, just to dig in a little bit further into activities or the actions that happen in each phase. So yeah, in phase 1, we're gathering information, to really make an educated decision on what to do. So we're doing a size up, which includes looking at like the humanitarian impact, the geographic scope of the event. We're engaging with the local community to get their input and getting them involved in the actual coordination of the response. And then if it's looking like we are going to do something, say we got the previous example of we're creating initial projects so that when we launch, there's stuff for the volunteer crowd to just jump in and start contributing to. Phase 2, yeah, this is kind of those they're happening throughout the response. We're creating new projects and archiving the other ones, doing validation, monitoring our progress to make sure that the direction we're headed is accessed, or those objectives that we set out to do, and then also ongoing documentation and reporting so that we can inform the requesters and any other partner organizations of what we're doing. The volunteer mappers and validators know the direction we're headed, and all the pieces and players are well informed as we're going along. Phase 3, as I said, is kind of that conclusion phase. We're really doing a thorough review of quality and completion to make sure maybe we need to go back to phase 2 and do more projects, that kind of thing. We're starting to plan longer term capacity building and support for local communities, and the big one being that we sit down and review. Typically we do what we call like a debrief and after action review, where we talk about what did we set out to do, what ended up happening, and we get everybody's feedback on what went well, so we can continue so well, so we can fix those things, and then anything that's like the in hindsight, if we would have known X, we should have done Y, and those kind of things can really help us get it back to phase 0, that day-to-day, building up our capacity to do even better on the next event. So yeah, we're also maintaining, this is specific to HOT, that we're maintaining a roster of which may or may not happen in local communities. And then ongoing readiness activities, which is as simple as following Twitter and other channels where we can so that we can launch into phase 1 and potentially have more impact if we're sort of quicker to jump in. So in 2015, we published the first version of the protocol and the training center, etc. It's open for anybody to use to build individual capacity, or in the case of local communities, for them to pick it up and build local capacity in disaster response. Fast forward some more, another 5 years go by. Now that we've been using this protocol, we've now evaluated over 100 different incidents, and about 80 of those led to a response. You can see here from 2008 to 2021, this is all of the incidents or all of the activations in 2 years, 2020 and 2021, that we actually started recording all of the other size ups that we did, but that didn't turn into full-fledged response. So you can see, obviously, there's a lot more going on that we don't actually respond to. What we don't reflect in this yet is those incidents that were community-led and HOT just kind of played a support role. It was pretty, I should say, up until 2015, it was pretty rare that there was a community, and especially a community that was able to lead their own responses. But by 2020, we were really starting to see more and more and had this vision coming in. HOT was growing. We had new funding from H2H and Audacious, so we were able to kind of step back and look at this from a different lens and start looking at, what does it look like to have more and more, and potentially, all disasters led by a local community, and HOT just supporting. That said, now we know some places, still don't have much of a community, and some disasters, like a multi-hurricanes in Central America, impacting multiple countries and many communities. These things may still require a leadership role from HOT, but we still see that communities, I think all communities can benefit from having some exposure and training on how we have developed, the way that we respond to disasters. And as we see more and more communities emerging that are capable of running their own OpenStreetMap projects, we're thinking about this on this regional basis. So for those of you that haven't seen this map, this is from this is our basically about 2 years ago we re-envisioned like how hot should making power to the local communities. So we came up with these 4 hubs. 3 of the hubs have already launched. The only one that's still kind of in the process of launching in the East and South Africa and the Asia Pacific hub. We have disaster managers regionally, so they are really helping in a more direct way empower those local communities to do disaster response and train them on these things. Luckily, we have really good examples of communities that are doing this out there on their own. Iris Zinler, or OpenStreetMap Turkey, during it was, I think 2021, just last year, there was an earthquake sort of in between Greece and Turkey in the Aegean Sea. And the local community in Turkey like really stepped up and did an amazing job, rallying the community to make nearly 500,000 edits. They even organized some field mapping visits, once the area was, and they created, these maps and other data products, kind of showcasing the damage for, aid agencies to use, which is really stuff that's tough for the global HOT disaster services folks to do, especially the field mapping component. It's kind of beyond my capacity to really help with field mapping. We've had a presence in the Democratic Republic of Congo for a long time. So when the Nyiragongo volcano erupted and lead the response on their own. We have many examples of this, popping up, over the last, especially the last couple of years, but even, going back decades. or a decade, maybe not multiple decades. But so yeah, moving kind of into the end of my presentation component here, in order of community-led disaster mapping, we really needed to look at the activation protocol again. You know, since 2014, when it was designed, 2015 it was launched, it really hasn't been touched and you know, reworked, thinking about the new realities of HOT and this vision for community-led disasters. So in February, we finally got version 2 done. Hopefully what we did with this was kind of simplify the document, or simplify the language, and made, you know, the graphics all translatable, so that we can, yeah, get it into different languages more easily. And then we've also switched from a role system to a tier system, which I'll touch again, but really put that community engagement component to the top. So for us, the next piece is really the curriculum. You know, after I'm done here with these last few slides, discuss the, I'm going to just stop my camera real quick to save on bandwidth. But we're going to have some time to discuss these next couple of pieces to the puzzle, so to speak, and talk about, like, are we providing the local communities what they need in order to actually succeed on the full that we don't know about, or that we're teaching them things that they already know, and kind of, you know, wasting each other's time. The roles and tiers. So in version 1, not too much on the slide to read, so don't worry about it too much. But what we found in practice is that, you know, often it doesn't take more than you know, like probably at minimum 2 people, but sometimes no more than a handful of people to actually manage even the most complicated of responses. So instead of having, you know, one person filling each of these roles, it's more like, you know, just a few people taking on multiple roles. And that kind of led us to decide that we need to shift to a tiered system. So as you can see at the kind of the bottom here, again, probably I can't read this and don't worry about it too much, but that, you know, we've taken the functions and we've kind of grouped them into 4 tiers that will kind of restructure. Second piece of this is delivery. You know, like, is this self-paced Moodle course or Moodle, you know, platform with 11 courses, is it actually working? Or do we need to look at building capacity in a completely different way, and redo, you know, how we've been doing the training? So yeah, just a brief glimpse, you know. So also, yeah, in 2015 we launched the platform built on Moodle, and although it served HOT fairly well, we're just not sure that it's really served communities as we envisioned it to. So yeah, last slides, I promise. I think 3 before we get into the discussion. So yeah, if you want to learn more, there's links here. I think the links to, or the link to the slides is already in the invite that was on the working group calendar. But we can also, I'll throw it in the chat here later if somebody doesn't beat me. But bit.ly/activation protocol will get you to the 2 versions. So, you know, both the version 1 from 2014, as well as the new one that we just launched. If you want to go ahead and take the training, it's courses.autos.org, and it will take us a while before we, redo that. So it's, it is the only way to get the training available to, don't hesitate to jump into that. And then also, yeah, if you want a real deep dive into sort of all things activation protocol, we have this Moodle, or this, this Miro board that I've been developing as we went through all of our workshops, and it's got a ton of information if you're interested. And then, yeah, feedback. Love to have feedback. If you just add draft on to the end of that bit.ly, so bit.ly, bit.ly/activation protocol draft without any spaces and capital. That'll get you to a Google Doc version of the protocol where you can actually leave comments and suggested edits, etc. And if you want to give feedback on the curriculum and site, we have a GitHub repo where you can also, if you're familiar with GitHub, you can create issues there. If you're not, then I'm going to give you an email here where you're more than welcome to just email feedback to disasterservices@hotosm.org, or ask me, and I can walk you through how to submit issues on the GitHub. Also, our activation working group meets every week. Currently, we're doing noon and midnight UTC on Thursdays, and it's on our Slack, on the HOT Slack disaster mapping channel. And right now, there's actually a poll to switch the working group because it's just not very well attended. So yeah, it's a good time to jump in on that if you want to know what time works for you. So yeah, discussion time. I have more poll questions. I'll throw out the first one, and I have a timer here for 90 seconds, just to kind of keep rolling through them. But if you want to raise your hand and discuss things, please do, and we can call on you if you want to discuss. But let me get the next poll question launched. So thank you so much for joining. Yeah, as people out, I'll just jump to the last slide, which just says thank you. So yeah, it was a pleasure doing this little intro. I know it's a lot of information, so if there's desire for more webinars or one-on-one about the protocol or the disaster mapping program, I'm happy to take that up after this